Hello YouTube! Today we are going to have a look into the useEffect hook and also the useLayoutEffect. You might now be asking one of two questions. What is the useEffect hook? Or in other words, when should I use the useEffect hook in my React applications? So reading the React documentation, we can find the following. The effect hook lets you perform side effects in function components. But if you don't know what side effects are, you might be asking now another question. So I will try to answer you. A side effect is any application state change that is observable from outside the function you called. Probably this doesn't mean much, so let's put some code into the picture. Let's say that we have this addNumbers function, and in the second line of our function, we have this window.variable equals to result. So every time we run this addNumbers function, if someone from the outside does window.variable, they will be able to see that this state changes every time the addNumbers is called. So addNumbers is performing a side effect of changing this global variable value. That's a side effect. If another function called this addNumbers, that function itself will have a side effect. Not directly, that's true, but indirectly it has a side effect because it's calling the addNumbers. Now, let me give you another example that is still a side effect. We are changing something directly into the DOM, so our users will be able to see that every time addNumbers runs, it will change something that our users are seeing. So that's a different type of side effect, but it's also a side effect. By having this as an example, you can probably think that the console log that you use quite a lot, if you do console log.bruno, that is also a side effect. If someone has the developer tools open in the console, they will see Bruno being printed. So we are changing state that is visible from the outside of that function once again. The same will apply to, for example, HTTP calls to your server. If you are using, for example, WebSockets, you will open and close the WebSockets inside a useEffect hook. So now that you have a better understanding of what the useEffect hook should be used for and what side effects are, let's see the first code using a useEffect. So over here, you can see this useEffect, and now we are passing a function inside our useEffect. The code internally, that function, is not that important. The only thing I want you to focus right now is we have the useEffect, we call the useEffect and pass a function into it, right? So what is the intentions that we have as a developer? Let's just simplify this code a little bit and see what are our intentions. Well, the first intention, if this component is being rendered with the name of Bruno, our first intention is that our users will have a div with Bruno into their screen sooner or later, right? That's the first intention you have as a developer that built this screen. So this is our first intention. The second intention is that sooner or later, React will be able to run our function and say on the console, Bruno. That's the second intention we have. So let's now jump into the timeline in order to understand what happens after the moment that React calls our component with Bruno. So over here, this is the moment that React called our component. Our component executes and will return that div with Bruno inside and also the useEffect. But the useEffect React will keep it over here for now, right? We will pick it in a second. So right now, React will look into our div Bruno and say, oh, okay, I need to transform the DOM in order to have this div with Bruno. So React starts those DOM changes and it will look something like this if you open the developer tools, right? At this moment, our browser didn't have yet the chance to do what we call the browser painting, okay? So you will see on your browser just white for this second, okay? Now, your browser will, yes, have a chance to paint. And when your browser paints, it will translate whatever we have over there into pixels. So you will be now able to see Bruno in your screen. Now, yes, now React knows that the browser painted. So I go into my effect and I will run this function that was passed to my effect. So our function will run and it will say to the console, Bruno into the console. Right? So this was the timeline for the useEffect. And this is very, very good. You can see that the useEffect code is offloaded to after the browser paints, and this will help you improve some metrics. For example, the first meaningful paint that you will see into some lighthouse metrics if you run the profiling. Okay? Now, there are use cases where you don't want to run after the browser painting. They are very small and very few, but they exist. So when you have code like this, document.querySelector div.style.background equals to red. If our effect was dead, then after our effect runs, we will have another browser painting over there, and we will end up with Bruno with a background color of red. But this is usually not ideal for our users because they saw a blank screen, then they see Bruno, and then they see the background changing to red. In this specific example, because we have so little DOM elements, it will be completely okay. You will not see any flickering, and probably you don't even see this middle one because it's so fast that you don't have a chance to see it. But when you start to have a really big application, this type of scenarios will give you what we call the flickering. So your screen will do some type of flickering, and it's very annoying as a user experience. So you want to eliminate that middle state of your UI. And for that, you want something that allows you to run your useEffect before the browser paints. And for that, we have the useLayoutEffect. So let's jump into the next screen because this one is getting a bit too messy and just look into the useLayoutEffect after the moment that our React does the DOM changes. So if we are over here, right now, if we are using useLayoutEffect, it will run immediately after the DOM changes from React, synchronously immediately after. So when it runs, it will now change our HTML or our DOM to have that style with a color of red, and only after it will give the chance for the browser to paint. So now when our browser paints, you will have no middle state with Bruno with a background color of white. You go immediately from a white screen to a screen with Bruno with a background color of red. This is very important that we have those two in React. The useEffect offloads a lot of important stuff to after the browser paints. So it will help us in some metrics like the first meaningful paint. The more we can remove from the browser paints, right? The less code we have before the browser paints, the better. And so useEffect is what we will use the most, but some use cases like this one I showed to you, the useLayoutEffect is quite effective. So now you have the knowledge to decide which one you need depending on the occasion you have in your application. And without much more talk, let's now jump into Visual Studio Code, where I will show you how to perform an HTTP call using the useEffect hook. Over here we have the same counter component we created in our last video for the useState. You can see that we still have the description as a property of our counter, and we have the buttons to decrease and increase our counter. So if I click there, it increases, it decreases, I can do Bruno 1, 2, 3, 4, and it still shows the result over there. So let's say that now I ask you for a new feature over here. I ask you every time that description changes, I want to do a console log of description. So you will be tempted to do something like this. useEffect, and now you pass a function into it and do console log of description, right? That will be probably your first try. If we go into our developer tools and I do 1, 2, 3, 4, it seems to be working. But now every time that something else in my component changes and forces it to re-render, it prints once again, and once again, and once again, and once again, right? So what's happening over here? What's happening is that every time that our component re-renders, because description changed or because the count value changed, we are still creating a function, and because we don't have any dependency array over here, React, after the browser paints the new changes, will just call our function over here. So even if the value didn't change, React just calls our function, we have a console log of description, so it just shows what it shows, right? Now, if we just want this function to be executed every time description changes, we can pass a second parameter to our useEffect. And that parameter will be an array of dependencies. In this case, the only dependence we have is the description itself. So if I come over here and I refresh this page, you can see I do 1, 2, 3, 4, and I still printed that. But now I can do whatever I want in any other property of my component. Doesn't matter how many times our component re-renders, React will check the last value of description was, for example, Bruno. Now the value is still Bruno, so doesn't call our function. But if the new value is, for example, Bruno 1, then yes, it calls the function because it's a different value, right? And this is very important for us when we are using the useEffect. Otherwise, we will be having this function being called a lot of times, and most of them will be useless, right? So now that you know that, let's say that you are doing an HTTP call, and that HTTP call is taking, for example, 3 seconds. So we can simulate that before we do a real HTTP call with a setTimeout, right? So let's just do a setTimeout and simulate that this HTTP call is taking 3 seconds, for example. So let's move this console log inside the setTimeout. And if we run this code, now let's see what happens. I will run the code and I will do 1, 2, 3, 4. We wait for 3 seconds, and then it will start to show all the values that we had before, right? So this is exactly what happened in the previous video. Our component renders, we create this function, and at the time we created this function, the value was, for example, Bruno. So whenever the setTimeout is finalized, it will print Bruno. Then this component was called with Bruno1, which is this second render. So when this function is created, the value encapsulated there, it will be description as Bruno1. So when it prints, it will print Bruno1. And well, it will do the same thing up to Bruno 1, 2, 3, 4. If for some reason you don't want this to happen and you only want the last one, right? Because sometimes if it's just intermediate stuff that is not finalized, you probably don't care about it. The useEffect hook has something for us that's very useful, which is a cleanup function. We can return a function over here. You can return as a arrow function. You can return as a normal function like this, right? Usually, I like to call this function whatever I'm doing over here. In this case, I'm just stopping the setTimeout or clearing the interval. So I will call that clean the interval from setTimeout, right? You can call it something else. And now what we want to do is, because this is a render that didn't finalize yet, we create the setTimeout for in 3 seconds. So if a new render starts, this function will be called before that new render starts. So in this case, I just want to cancel that setTimeout. Luckily, setTimeout returns the ID of this timeout. So we can just come over here and do clear interval of my ID. Doing this, now, when the new render starts, the previous one will call this function. Calling this function, we cancel that interval is gone. So I can now come over here, refresh, do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now only the last one will be printed into my console. If I keep typing and I do 5, 6 again, only the last one will be once again printed into my console, right? So if there are any intermittent or in the middle setTimeouts waiting, we just cancel the ones that are still waiting, right? That might be useful, especially if you want to abort HTTP calls for your server. So now let's say that you were using something else that doesn't give you this ID for you to cancel. And that might happen when you don't control the code you are calling. So let's say that you want to execute the same type of thing, but without having that ID in order to clear the timeout. So you will see this pattern from time to time, and you create a new variable over here. People that are coming from React using classes, they will call it mounted equals to true. For you, you can call it the current render or something like that, right? So I will explain to you what's happening. You will call it current render, for example, and you will say true. So If for some reason React starts a new render, now in our destruction or in our cleanup function, so let's just do this. In our cleanup function, we can just say, okay, current render equals to false because we are starting a new render. So whenever this setTimeout fires, we can look into that current render. We see, oh, the current render is false. So we don't do a console log. Let me just come over here and do current render equals to false. And now you just need to do something like this. Current render, right? So if it is the current render, you do the console log. I can even do an else for you to see what's happening. So I can do console log of, oops, I am done. Or in this case, I am the past, right? Not done, but the past. So I can now refresh. If I do 1, 2, 3, 4, you will see, oops, I am done. It will be printed 4 times, and then the last time we will print the value inside the current render. This might be very useful when you don't control the libraries that you are calling and they just have a callback or something like that, right? This is very, very useful. So I will just now do a commit for my repository for you to also have this bit of code, right? I will do a commit and then I will come back to show you how we can do the HTTP calls. I already committed our changes and you can see them into this commit, the setTimeout examples. If you click on this icon, it will navigate you to that moment in time. You can then click on source, come to counter, and you will see that I committed both versions. The version with the clear timeout and the version that I was using the current render with the if-else logic. And this if-else logic might be useful for you to also do in HTTP calls. But in reality, I will recommend you to use something like SWR, even though I will show you how you can do a simple HTTP call using the useEffect. So for that, we will come to JSON placeholder over here. And if you scroll to the bottom and run this script, you will see that doing this HTTP call, it will return this JSON over here. So let's copy this bit over there, open our VS Code. Let me just also open my browser, and we will do the following. Asynchronous function load data, and over here we will put that bit. Now I can do const response equals to await of our fetch, and then I just need to do const JSON equals to await response.json, right? This is usually a very simple HTTP call when we are using the useEffect in React. You can now open our development tools, and when I clear this, you will see that nothing is happening. And why? Because I forgot to call this load data. So we need to call that load data. Now, yes, now if I just refresh this, you will see that I'm doing this console log of the ASD. I can just pass the JSON and you will see that I have it over there. What if I want to now change it to, for example, whatever value is in description, right? You will see that when I save, I will have a 404 because it doesn't exist. But then if I put, for example, 12, I'm getting the ID 12 over here, which is exactly what we want. Now, let me just create something over here called to-do set to-do equals to use state. And now I will just do set to-do. Instead of doing the console log, I will do the set to-do as JSON, right? And now I will put, for example, in my JSX over here, I will do to-do dot, but now we don't have types yet. So let's come back to our JSON placeholder website, copy this JSON bit over there, come to a website called JSON2TS, and this website is just magic and save me so much time. So now you click on generate TypeScript and you will see that from any JSON you put over there, it will generate interfaces for you. So we just need to copy this interface over there. Now come into our VS Code and now paste this interface. Oops, not that comment. Paste this interface over there. I will call it to do. And now I just need to use the generics on my use state to pass a to-do over there. So you can see that now it can be a to-do or undefined. I come over here, do a control space once again, I do enter, and now I have the title. TypeScript already knows that it might be undefined, so it's protecting us as well. I come over here, and now when I put 12, I'm receiving the title of my 12. I can put 1, 2, 3, and I'm receiving the title from 1 to 3. This is very, very nice, right? So what can we do apart from it? We can now, if you want to, start to do the validations for example, when I have Bruno, you will get a 404. You have an exception. You can start to put a try catch over there. And then also on this set to do, you will have the problem that you can do an HTTP call now that will take, let's say, 30 seconds to complete. This is bad, but let's say 30 seconds to complete, and you do another one over here. So you would want to ignore the first one. But if this one is started here and finishes immediately here, if that one is only finishing immediately over there, you will be setting a to-do for the old one. So you will probably want to do again that Boolean trick that we did before in order to, if it's not the current render, just don't set it up. I will do a commit on my repository with that, but I will leave that as homework for you. And also, if you really see yourself doing this quite a lot, please don't do this. Do this as an exercise, but don't do this in a real application. In a real application, you probably want to use something like SWR or React query, right? I will leave a link into the description and also probably in a card over there to a video we already have on the channel about SWR that will do all of this code we have over here in a single line. SWR will look something like this, like data loading error equals to use SWR and then the HTTP / www, whatever. So all that we have over here will be done over here with only one line. Plus, it will give you caching, it will do a lot of benefits for you, like the error handling and all of those things. So I will leave that link in the description and in a card. So I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to do the exercise I left to you, go into my GitHub repository and see my last commit where I'm doing that mounting and doing the if else to not use the latest set to do, but the latest that was called. All right. So I hope to see you in the next video about the use memo, and we will do memoization in React. So I hope to see you there, and bye-bye.